Salam alaikum, students at Sheikh Anta Diop University. This is Benjamin. So, I am making a video currently on slavery, and I know that you guys have a few questions for me, and I don't know if I'm going to break this video up into parts, so I might do that. But first and foremost, I want to tell you what is my experience and what is my knowledge on slavery. First and foremost, I am African American. I'm about a fifth or sixth generation descendant of the last slave, the last ancestor that was in slavery. I'm about 5 or 6 generations from them, which is not too far because most African Americans that are around my age, by the time they're 18, 20, they're at least they're about on their 8th or 10th generation of being away from that ancestor. So I'm one of the few who can still remember my history, as in terms of my family history, and one of the few who can actually tell you where we were originally boated. So let's get to some of these questions. And plus, I have read a lot into slave history. It's something that you have to do as an African American, especially when you're coming from the South. And I will answer that question about where the geographical location is very important in a minute. But let's get off into some of these questions here. So, question one: tell us about the waves of slaves in America. And part two is where did they first land in America? I'm gonna put both of those questions together. The waves of slaves, first and foremost, most slaves were coming from the Senegambia coast in the early start off of America, mostly from Senegambia and Ghana and Nigeria. You had a good portion of them that when the slave trade had began, all right, when the slave trade had began, it was taken off from those coasts, and you had a split. There were ships that went into the Caribbean, ships that went to South America, and ships that went to North America. In North America, the first part that they got to in North America was Virginia, where they were originally supposed to be indentured slaves. They were not slaves, I'm sorry, indentured servants, and they were not originally supposed to be slaves. So it turned into slavery because this is when America was beginning as a colonial system with the 13 colonies. And so when they landed in America, which was somewhere in the 1600s, about 1619, they were not that harsh on slaves in the beginning. But then once they saw how profitable it was, they turned it into a much more harsher experience and when they turned it into a business. So yeah, that's pretty much the answer to that one. Richmond, Virginia was where the first slaves had landed in North America in 1619. Hold up. So now, part three. Is there any records of that? From my knowledge, yes. If I'm not mistaken, if you go to Richmond, Virginia right now, they keep good close tabs on history. You even have records if you go to some courthouses and some libraries that have the slaves that came in, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. If you go to Richmond, Virginia, Virginia is a very central historical point for America overall, and for slavery is very important as well because that was where the tobacco industry was, and they needed slaves in order to pick tobacco. So that was the reason why it was very, very important. Let's see. Number four. What is evolution of slaves up to independence time in America? Up to the independence time, all right. For the most part, there wasn't that much of an evolution, I will say. Well, okay, I'll take that back. There was a point in time prior to independence where you had a lot of slave revolts that were going on for a certain amount of time prior to independence. And these slave revolts were coming from Congolese slaves a lot of times. This was in the Americas. If you went to the Caribbean, most of the slaves that were pulling off revolts in the Caribbean at that time were in Jamaica. It was the Ghanaians, the Ashanti tribe. In Haiti or Haiti, it was the Benin, the people from Benin, the Dahomey, in Nigeria. In Nigeria that had been sent to Haiti. They're the ones pulling off a lot of the revolts. And in Brazil, it is uncertain, but considering the fact that Brazil had a heavy Bantu influence, especially coming from Angola, it was most likely Bantu slaves who were leading the slave revolts in Brazil. But specifically in America, there was a whole lot of Congolese slaves that were revolting at that time. So, hope that answers. And as far as the evolution, I won't say there was particularly an evolution, but there was more of an evolution with how to make Africans into slaves in America, because in the beginning process, it was very hard to contain them because they were just learning how to perfect slavery. But after studies in the Caribbean and studying slaves, they figured out how to break the African spirit within a slave. So, yeah. Number 5. Is there any remaining testimony of the African culture from the slaves? As in terms of culture, as in terms of the best one that we have currently is probably, as I'm sure most of you have heard of, is Roots, written by Alex Haley, when he discovered his ancestry, which was coming from the Senegambia region, where he turned out to be a Mandinka or Mandinke, Mandingo, however you pronounce it, because there are various pronunciations. But the ones who have true testament of their history for sure are the Geechees and the Gullahs, which are a group of African Americans who stay out in the Carolinas, and they still speak sort of an African language, somewhat. It's their own variation. They were the ones and the few who still retain a large part of that African culture, and I believe their language is mostly influenced from Senegambian languages, I believe. So they're the ones who probably can still tell you about what it was like in Africa for the most part, because really we don't have that much, there was not that much history that we could tell you as soon as we got off the boat here, because nobody could speak the same language, considering they mixed and mashed all the slaves together. Then if you were caught speaking the same language, you were going to be beaten. You had to learn English, and you had to forget your name and forget your culture. We still retain some parts of it, but that's pretty much for the most part what we had to